Police believe Bentley shot his former girlfriend in a home along Joyce Drive during an argument. He was already wanted on several charges and will now also face murder and attempted murder charges.
September 16th, 2020, 10:28 p.m., Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A 40-year-old mother stands behind her front door. On the other side, her ex-boyfriend demands to be let inside. She refuses. The metal screen door stays locked. Her voice is firm. "I don't want to talk to you." She closes the wooden door. 2 seconds pass, then gunfire. Bullets rip through the wood, one after another. Her 3 children watch as she collapses to the floor, blood pooling beneath her. The oldest grabs a rifle and calls 911. The younger 2 scream. Outside, the shooter vanishes into the night. This is the story of Brenda Mullens, a woman who did everything right and still paid the ultimate price. Welcome to our channel, where we don't just tell the story, we expose what went wrong and why it keeps happening. Before we go further, drop your city in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. We're building a community here, and your voice matters. Joyce Drive sits in one of those working-class areas where people know each other's names, where kids ride bikes up and down the block, and where everyone hears everything. It's not the worst part of town, but it's not the safest either. It's just real. On the night of September 16, 2020, neighbors on Joyce Drive were winding down. Some were watching TV. Others were getting kids ready for bed. Then they heard it. Shouting. Loud, angry voices cutting through the quiet. People paused. Listened. Tension hung in the air. Then came the gunfire. Within seconds, porches lit up. Doors cracked open. Someone screamed. Multiple people grabbed their phones and dialed 911. At 2944 Joyce Drive, Brenda Mullens' home had just become a crime scene. This wasn't just an address on a police report. This was where Brenda woke up every morning and made breakfast for her 3 kids, where she helped with homework at the kitchen table, where she collapsed into bed after long shifts, exhausted but determined to give her children a stable life. But stability is hard when the person threatening it keeps showing up at your door. Brenda Mullens was 40 years old when she died. Born around 1980, she spent her entire life in Louisiana. But here's the thing. Brenda wasn't a celebrity. She didn't have a Wikipedia page. Her name never appeared in headlines until the night she was murdered. And that's exactly what makes her story so important. Because Brenda was just like millions of other women across this country. She woke up early, she worked hard, she paid bills, she raised her kids, she survived. She was a mother to 3 children, Davyon, Brianta, and Devonta. They were her entire world. Every choice she made, every sacrifice, every long shift she worked, it all came back to them. Friends and family said she was the type of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it, even when she was struggling herself. Brenda worked as a fire watcher at Turner Industries, a job that required serious focus and responsibility. In industrial settings, fire watchers monitor welding and other high-risk operations to prevent disasters. One mistake, one moment of distraction, and people could get hurt. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. It paid the bills, and Brenda showed up every single day. Before that, she worked at All-Star Toyota of Baton Rouge. Co-workers remembered her as dependable, warm, and someone who always had your back. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she was the one you could count on when things got tough. Being a single mother wasn't easy. The financial stress was constant, the hours were long. There were days when exhaustion hit so hard she could barely keep her eyes open. But she kept going, because that's what mothers do. And then, at some point, she met Davyon Bentley. He went by Juice Bentley in Baton Rouge's local rap scene. He was 24 years old, he had charisma, he had ambition. He talked about making it big in music, about getting out of Baton Rouge and building something real. Maybe Brenda saw potential in him. Maybe she thought she could help him turn his life around. Maybe she was just looking for companionship in a life that often felt overwhelming and lonely. Whatever the reason, she gave him a chance. At first, things might have seemed okay, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Bentley was controlling. He accused Brenda of cheating constantly, even when there was zero evidence. He showed up at her house unannounced. He called her phone over and over, demanding to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. When she tried to set boundaries, he pushed harder. This wasn't love. This was control disguised as concern, jealousy disguised as care. Brenda's friends and family saw it. They warned her. They told her to stay away from him. But anyone who's ever been in a toxic relationship or watched someone they love go through one knows it's not that simple. There's fear, there's hope that things will get better, there's the emotional exhaustion of constantly walking on eggshells. And for mothers, there's the added weight of trying to protect your children while managing the chaos. But eventually, Brenda reached her breaking point. She ended the relationship. She told Bentley it was over. She stopped answering his calls. She made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him anymore. It was a brave decision, the right decision, the kind of decision that should have saved her life. But for men like Bentley, rejection isn't just painful, it's unforgivable. Davyon Bentley wasn't just Brenda's ex-boyfriend. In Baton Rouge, he was known. He performed under the name Juice Bentley, and in certain circles, that name carried weight. His music videos racked up views online. His freestyle clips circulated through the city's rap scene. He had connections, a growing fan base, and the kind of street credibility that comes from living the life he rapped about. Guns, violence, power, survival. But here's the problem: Bentley wasn't just performing, he was living it. By the time he was 24 years old, his criminal record read like a roadmap of escalating danger. 2017, harassment charges tied to an ex-girlfriend, a warning sign that should have been taken seriously. 2018, connected to a home invasion case, he forced his way into someone's residence, terrorizing the people inside. This wasn't a mistake, this was a choice. July 2020, just 2 months before Brenda's murder, Bentley invaded the home of yet another ex-girlfriend. But this time he didn't just break in, he fired 2 shots inside the apartment. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. Children were present. He discharged a firearm in a home with kids inside. Let that sink in. And yet, on the night of September 16, 2020, Davyon Bentley was still a free man. So why wasn't he in custody? That's the question Brenda's family asked. That's the question the Baton Rouge community asked. And it's the question we're still asking today. Because this is where the system failed. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Bentley's music often glorified the exact violence he was committing in real life. His lyrics painted pictures of street life, guns, and power. And while some people will argue that rap is just artistic expression, there's a difference between telling a story and living it. Bentley wasn't just an artist reflecting his environment, he was actively contributing to the violence he rapped about. Look at the pattern: multiple ex-girlfriends, multiple incidents of harassment, home invasion, and violence. The July 2020 shooting where he fired into an apartment with children inside. Every single one of these incidents involved a woman he had been in a relationship with. Brenda was just the one who didn't survive. So here's my question for you. Do you think artists who glorify violence in their music have a responsibility for the culture they create? Or is it just entertainment and we're reading too much into it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you think. When Brenda first got involved with Davyon Bentley, it probably didn't feel dangerous. That's how these relationships always start. Charm, attention, promises of something better. Maybe he made her laugh. Maybe he listened when she talked about her day. Maybe he made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. For a single mother, working long hours and carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, that kind of attention can feel like a lifeline. But the red flags didn't take long to surface. Here's what most people don't understand about domestic violence. The most dangerous moment isn't during the relationship, It's when the victim tries to leave. That's when abusers lose control. That's when they feel powerless. That's when the mask comes off and the violence escalates. For Bentley, Brenda's rejection wasn't just painful, it was unacceptable. He couldn't handle the fact that she was done with him, that she had moved on, that she didn't need him anymore. So he kept calling, kept showing up, kept trying to force his way back into her life. And on the night of September 16, 2020, he showed up one last time, but this time he brought a gun. September 16, 2020, around 10:00 p.m. Brenda Mullens was at home with her 3 children, Davyon, Brianna, and Devonta. It was a Wednesday night, the kind of night where you're winding down, getting ready for bed, thinking about work the next day. Then her phone rang. It was Davyon Bentley. Brenda didn't want to talk to him, she'd made that clear. But he kept calling, and about 20 minutes after that first call, he showed up at her door. Brenda knew something was wrong. You don't date someone with Bentley's history and not develop instincts. She felt it in her gut. She turned to her eldest son, Davyon, and told him to get a gun, specifically his brother's AK-47 rifle. This wasn't paranoia, this was survival. Brenda walked to the front door. The porch light was on. She opened the wooden door but kept the metal screen door locked. A barrier. A boundary. Bentley stood on the other side. Through the screen, he could see her face. She could see his. Brianna, standing in the kitchen doorway, caught a glimpse of half his face. Devonta, sitting on the living room couch, saw him clearly. He was alone. And on his side, Devonta noticed what looked like a gun. Bentley's voice was calm at first. "I just want to talk. Let me in." Brenda's response was firm. "I don't want to talk to you." She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just stated the boundary and held it. Then she closed the door. 2 seconds passed, maybe 3. Then, gunfire. Bullets tore through the wooden door. Splinters exploded into the living room. The sound was deafening. The children screamed. Brenda collapsed near the fish tank, blood spreading across the floor. Davyon's training kicked in. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. His voice was shaking but clear. "My mom's been shot. We need help, now!" Then he grabbed the rifle, ran outside, and fired back. Shots rang out in the front yard, then the backyard. He wasn't trying to kill anyone. He was trying to protect his family, trying to make the shooter run. And it worked. Bentley fled. Inside the house, Brianna and Devonta were frozen in shock, staring at their mother's body on the floor. Outside, neighbors were already calling 911. Multiple calls flooded the dispatch center within seconds. I heard shouting, then gunshots. "Someone's been shot on Joyce Drive." "There's kids screaming. Send someone now." Officers Haley Alexander and Sergeant Derek Moore were among the first to arrive. Their body cameras captured everything. As they pulled up, 3 children came running toward them, frantic and terrified. "Mother's been shot." "Who did this?" Officer Alexander asked. Without hesitation, all 3 children gave the same name: Juice Bentley. Paramedics rushed inside. Brenda was still alive, but barely. They loaded her into an ambulance and sped toward the hospital. The children were taken to the police station for interviews. Back at the scene, detectives began processing the evidence. Detective Joshua Brogan from the Baton Rouge Police Department Homicide Division walked through the house, documenting everything. Bullet holes riddled the wooden front door. The metal screen door had impact marks where rounds struck and ricocheted. Inside there were holes in the walls, a shattered mirror frame, a broken vase, and damage to the mailbox. Corporals Chanta Beard, Julius Raymond, and Andrew DeSalvo from the Crime Scene Investigations Division photographed and collected evidence. Bullet fragments and projectiles were recovered from inside the home, small caliber, likely 9mm rounds. But here's the key detail: no shell casings were found inside the house. Outside, however, they found 5 9mm shell casings in the front yard. In the backyard, they recovered 2 7.62 x39mm casings, the type fired from an AK-47 rifle. Those were Damien's rounds, fired in self-defense after his mother had already been shot. The evidence was clear. Every bullet that entered the home came from outside. The wood splinters, the trajectory, the casings, it all pointed to one conclusion. Davyon Bentley stood on that porch and fired multiple rounds through the door, knowing Brenda was on the other side. At the hospital, doctors fought to save Brenda's life, but the damage was too severe. Dr. Anne Van Vo, the forensic pathologist who later performed the autopsy, determined that a single bullet caused the fatal injuries. It entered the outside of Brenda's right arm, exited through the inside, re-entered her chest on the right side, and tore through her liver, right lung, and heart before exiting the left side of her chest. The bullet had passed through the door first, which explained the fragmentation and the devastating internal damage. Dr. Van Vo concluded that Brenda was most likely shot with a handgun, not a rifle, based on the wound pattern and the size of the projectile. Brenda Mullens died that night, a woman who did everything right and still lost her life. Meanwhile, Davyon Bentley was gone. By the time police arrived, he had vanished into the night. But the Baton Rouge Police Department moved fast. Within hours, they issued an arrest warrant charging him with first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for the children present, illegal use of a weapon, and felon in possession of a firearm. They warned the public Bentley was armed and dangerous. Do not approach. Call 911 immediately if spotted. And just like that, Davyon Bentley disappeared. For Brenda's family, the days that followed were unbearable. 3 children, Damian, Briantar, and Devonta, had just watched their mother die in front of them. They were traumatized, grieving, and terrified. And the man who killed her was still out there, free, possibly armed, and capable of anything. Every day that passed without an arrest felt like another failure, another injustice. Investigators worked around the clock. They followed leads, interviewed Bentley's known associates, and combed through Baton Rouge looking for any trace of him. They checked his usual hangouts, contacted family members, and monitored social media for any sign of activity. But Bentley had gone silent. No posts, no sightings, no trace. Weeks passed. Frustration grew. The community was on edge, wondering if he'd strike again. Brenda's family was desperate for answers, for closure, for justice. Then, a break. A tip came in suggesting Bentley had fled Louisiana altogether. He had connections outside the state, friends from his rap career, people who might shelter him, give him money, help him disappear. That's when federal marshals joined the case. This was no longer just a local manhunt. If Bentley had crossed state lines, it became a federal matter. Coordination with out-of-state law enforcement became critical. Investigators began tracking leads that pointed west. Phone records, financial transactions, tips from informants. Everything pointed in one direction: Colorado. Bentley had traveled over 1,000 miles from Baton Rouge to Denver, and here's the thing, he wasn't hiding in some remote cabin in the mountains. He was moving around the city, staying with people, acting like he could outrun the consequences. That kind of confidence is dangerous. It meant he believed he was untouchable, that he could kill a woman in front of her children and just disappear into another state without facing justice. But on October 12, 2020, nearly a month after Brenda's murder, federal marshals and Denver police closed in. Bentley was taken into custody without incident. He was prepared for extradition back to Louisiana to face the charges waiting for him in Baton Rouge. When news broke that Bentley had been captured, the reaction in Baton Rouge was immediate. Relief mixed with anger. Grief mixed with frustration. Hundreds of people flooded social media, commenting on news articles about the arrest. Some expressed gratitude that he was finally off the streets. Others vented their rage at how long it took, at how many chances he'd been given, at how the system had failed Brenda. Bentley's local fame made the case even more high-profile. People knew his music, they'd seen his videos, some had even supported his career. Now, they were grappling with the reality that the person they'd been listening to was a killer. The conversation shifted. Domestic violence, gun crime, the failures of the criminal justice system. How many red flags had been ignored? How many women had to die before something changed? But for Brenda's family, Bentley's arrest was just the beginning of another painful chapter. After his arrest in Denver, Davyon Bentley was extradited back to Baton Rouge to face the consequences of what he'd done. The charges were serious. Originally, prosecutors pursued first-degree murder, but the grand jury indicted him on second-degree murder, still a charge that carried life in prison. He also faced attempted murder, illegal use of a weapon, and felon in possession of a firearm. Bentley pled not guilty. His defense would later try to argue that the evidence didn't prove he was the shooter, suggesting that maybe Davyon had fired the fatal shots from inside the house. It was a desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt, but the evidence told a different story. Prosecutors came prepared. They laid out Bentley's violent history in detail. The 2017 harassment charges, the 2018 home invasion, the July 2020 shooting at another ex-girlfriend's apartment, where he fired rounds with children present. This wasn't a one-time tragedy. This was a pattern, a clear, documented escalation of violence against women. But the most devastating evidence didn't come from police reports or forensic analysis. It came from 3 children who had to relive the worst night of their lives. Damien, Briante, and Devonte would have to take the stand and testify about watching their mother die. They would have to describe the sound of gunfire tearing through their front door, the sight of her collapsing to the floor, the blood, the chaos, the terror. That kind of trauma doesn't just fade. It lives with you forever. It changes you. And for these 3 kids, justice wouldn't undo what they'd seen. It wouldn't bring their mother back. Before the trial began, Brenda's family held her funeral. It was October 2020, just weeks after her death. The service took place at Living Faith Christian Center in Baton Rouge. Family, friends, co-workers, and community members gathered to honor her memory. Everyone wore red and white, colors chosen to celebrate the vibrant life Brenda had lived. Not the violence that ended it, but the warmth, the love, the strength she showed every single day. The service wasn't just a goodbye, it was a declaration. Brenda Mullens would not be remembered only as a victim. She would be remembered as a mother who sacrificed everything for her children, a woman who worked hard, showed up, and cared deeply about the people around her. When the trial finally began, the most powerful testimony came from the 3 people who witnessed everything firsthand: Damien, Brianta, and Devonta. All 3 children had been interviewed multiple times, first at the scene, captured on body camera footage as they stood outside their home in shock, then at the police station, where their statements were recorded in detail, and now in court, where they had to relive that night all over again. Each of them had identified Bentley from photographic lineups. Each of them was certain, no hesitation, no doubt. The forensic evidence backed them up. Detective Joshua Brogan from the Baton Rouge Police Department Homicide Division testified that every bullet was fired from outside the house, traveling inward. There was no evidence of shots fired from inside. Damien's testimony was corroborated by the physical evidence. Dr. Ann Van Vo, the forensic pathologist who performed Brenda's autopsy, testified that the fatal bullet had passed through the door first before entering Brenda's body. The wound pattern and projectile size were more consistent with a handgun than a rifle. Everything pointed to one conclusion: Davyon Bentley stood on that porch and fired multiple rounds through the door, knowing Brendan was on the other side. The defense tried to create doubt. They questioned the children's identification. They suggested that maybe Damien had fired shots from inside the house, implying he could have accidentally shot his own mother. It was a desperate argument, and the jury didn't buy it. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was consistent. The forensics were clear. On the final day of trial, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Bentley was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. His legal team filed a motion for a new trial. It was denied. They appealed the conviction. The Louisiana Court of Appeal reviewed the case and affirmed both the conviction and the sentence. Davyon Bentley would spend the rest of his life in prison. Justice was served, but it came too late for Brenda. Brenda Mullens' story isn't unique. And that's the most terrifying part. Domestic violence affects millions of people every year. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. That's more than 10 million people annually. Brenda's case is a textbook example of how these situations escalate and how the system fails to intervene before it's too late. So what can we learn, and how do we stop this from happening again? Recognize the signs: controlling behavior, constant accusations, isolation from friends and family, explosive jealousy, threats of violence. These aren't just personality quirks or signs of someone who cares too much. They're red flags, and domestic violence almost always escalates over time. What starts as verbal abuse turns into physical violence. What starts as showing up unannounced turns into stalking. What starts as threats turns into murder. Take threats seriously. A history of violence is one of the strongest predictors of future violence. If someone has been arrested for domestic violence before, if they've threatened an ex-partner, if they've shown up at someone's home uninvited, those aren't isolated incidents. They're warnings. Don't assume threats are harmless. Don't brush them off as drama. Report them to law enforcement, document everything, create a paper trail. Support victims without judgment. If someone you know is in an abusive relationship, don't ask why they haven't left yet. Offer help, provide resources, encourage them to reach out to shelters, hotlines, or counseling services. Leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for a victim. They need support, not criticism. Advocate for change. Support policies that address domestic violence and gun safety. Get involved in community efforts. Push for better funding for shelters and victim services. And challenge cultural norms. Speak out against the glorification of violence in music, media, and entertainment. Promote positive alternatives for young people. Hold artists and influencers accountable for the messages they send. Hold perpetrators accountable. Individuals with violent histories need to face real consequences. That means improving law enforcement coordination, closing gaps in the system, and ensuring that outstanding warrants are actually enforced. Brenda's story carries a message we can't afford to ignore. Domestic violence doesn't just destroy individuals, it destroys families. It leaves generational scars. It creates cycles of trauma that ripple outward, affecting communities for years to come. We honor Brenda by taking action, by supporting victims without judgment, by holding abusers accountable, by demanding systemic change that closes the gaps and protects people before it's too late. Brenda deserved better, her children deserved better, and the thousands of people still trapped in abusive relationships deserve better. If this story gripped you, we've covered other cases just like this. Check the links in the pinned comment for more true crime stories that expose the failures of the system and the resilience of survivors. And if you found this intriguing, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe so you never miss another case. Stay safe out there.